Welcome back, everybody, to Cardboard Currencies. Today we've got a special. We're going to break the bank with our man Torens, Fist of the Angels. That's right, we got another deck tech that we're going to look at Torens with, but this time we're going to spend a bunch of money doing it. So if you've missed the first episode of this, go back and look at that, because we'll be using basically the same deck. We will be subbing out 19 cards, however. And as promised, I will also go over the lands that I would include in this. So, without further ado, let's look at Torens. So what will we be taking out? First, we'll be taking out Young Goo. We'll be taking out Lifecrafter's Bestiary and Glorious Sunrise. And in the place of that, we'll be adding a couple of cards. First off is Vigor. Vigor is a 6 mana cost creature. It has trample, and if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage. Put a 1/1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. When Vigor is put into a graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it into its owner's library. We'll also be adding Kodama of the West Tree. It's a 3-drop that has reach, and modified creatures you control have trample. Equipment, auras you control, and counters are modifications. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. The last one we'll be adding is Toski, Bearer of Secrets. It's a 4-drop, and this spell can't be countered. He's indestructible. Toski, Bearer of Secrets attacks each combated fable, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So we're adding card draw, we're adding ramp, replacing all the things that we're taking away. Those Young Goo's effect is nice. Vigor's is just a little bit better for us. Next, we'll be taking out Whiptongue Hydra. Whiptongue Hydra was great, but March of Souls is better. March of Souls says, destroy all creatures. They can't be generated. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller puts a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying into play. Though this will give all your opponents 1/1 white spirit creature tokens, it's also giving you a bunch of 1/1 white spirit creature tokens. Hopefully more than your opponents, but overall this is just a better board wipe, and it has the upside of giving you a bunch of flying creatures. While we're on the topic of Hydras, we'll be taking out Mistcutter Hydra, Hydra Broodmaster, and Hungering Hydra. Instead, we'll be replacing them with a couple of different creatures and an overarching theme. So we'll be replacing it with Lunarch Veteran, Core Celebrant, and Impassioned Orator. All 3 of these cards kind of do the same thing. They're all creatures that make it to where whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. That includes the tokens that you're making on top of all the creatures that you're throwing in. And we're adding these for a specific reason that we'll see later. Now, in addition to the previous Hydras we'd take out, we're taking out Hooded Hydra, Mana Gorger Hydra, and Champion of the Parish. Great Hydras, but we're subbing in a different sub-theme here. And we're replacing it with Daxos, Blessed of the Sun, Heliod Suncrowned, and then we'll be subbing in Suture Priest. Now my version's in Japanese, but what it says is, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may gain 1 life. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may have that player lose 1 life. So this is a great addition to be able to gain some life, make opponents lose life, but all of this will feed into Heliod Suncrowned. Whenever you gain life, you're putting 1/1 counters on a target creature or an enchantment that you control. In addition, you can pay 2 and make another target creature gain lifelink until end of turn. So we're subbing in this life gain along with the tokens, the 1/1 counters that we're already gaining. We're doing this for a couple of reasons, and the main one goes into our next little tech here. So we'll be taking out End Raise Forerunners to add Walking Ballista. Walking Ballista says that it enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, X being what you paid into that X count. Now, you can remove a +1/+1 counter from Walking Ballista, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Now, when you team that up with Heliod Suncrowned, you can give Walking Ballista lifelink, and you have an infinite effect. You take off 1/1/1 counter, you deal 1 damage, you gain 1 life from the lifelink that Heliod Sun Crown can give you. As soon as you gain the life, you can put another 1/1 counter on Walking Ballista, and there you go. So the next 3 cards we'd be subbing in are Kaiser, Ruthless Stalker, Neverwinter Dryad, and Burnished Heart. Now we would be taking these cards out to make room for another infinite combo, which is based off of Aluren. Aluren says any player may cast a creature card with total casting cost 3 or less whenever he or she could play an instant and without paying its casting cost. The next 2 cards we'd be subbing in are Stonecloaker, which has Flash and Flying, and when Stonecloaker enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. When Stonecloaker enters the battlefield, exile target card from a graveyard. Again, this is a Japanese version of this card, but it's a Whitemane Lion that has something kind of similar, and it says that it has Flying, and when Whitemane Lion enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. Both of these cards can technically target themselves. So, with Aluren out on the field, you can cast a creature card for free as long as it costs 3 or less, which both of these do. It can target itself and bounce it back to your hand, which you can then cast for free, which can infinitely make Dr. John Seward or Torens Fists of the Angels trigger infinitely. You can get an infinite amount of 1/1 green and white human soldier creature tokens with training, and infinitely make more and more. So, with this infinite amount of 1/1 creature tokens on your next turn, swing it in, and you win. Now, the next 3 that we would sub out are Lion Sash, Mace of the Valiant, and Loxodon Warhammer. Mostly these cards were in to make sure that training can proc over and over again, which it can still do, but this deck is a little bit more tuned and doesn't need the equipment that the other deck would need. So the next card we'd sub in is Bantu's Monument. The first part we don't really care about because it says black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Technically, there's not a mana requirement that's attached to this, so technically we can still add it into Torens. But the second part says whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This deck will be constantly sending out creatures from our hand, which will proc this, gain us life, and making each opponent lose 1 life. The next card we'd sub in is the Ozolith. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. So this will ultimately save us a bunch of counters to be able to put onto other things. And then Aura Shards. It says whenever a creature comes into play under your control, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So when we cast a creature spell, we'll be able to target an enchantment or an artifact, and then our token will come into play, and we'll be able to target another one, hopefully clearing the field of our opponent's pesky artifacts or enchantments. The next ones that we would take out are Intangible Virtue, Always Watching, and ultimately a land slot. The mana costs for the creatures that we're subbing in and out are technically lower, and so we don't need that land, and in its place we'd be taking Idyllic Tutor, which says search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So this can look for a lot of enchantments, but it's most likely going to be looking for our next 2, the first one being Doubling Season. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. If an effect would put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many of those counters on that permanent instead, doubling all of our counters that move, doubling all of our tokens that we create, is a great addition to this deck. And to go along with it is Anointed Procession. Again, this is a Japanese version, but it has that same token doubling effect. Basically saying if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many. Now let's talk about lands. This is the part I kind of dislike talking about decks because realistically land is a hard topic to talk about. Depending on who you are, depends on what you consider as lands, and we'll talk about that a little bit as things go on, but this is just my opinion of how the land would go in this deck. And realistically, I've sleeved this, so this is my deck now. So the first card I'd add in is Path of Ancestry. Path of Ancestry enters the battlefield tapped. Add 1 mana of any color in your commander color's identity. When that mana is spent to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with your commander, scry 1. We have a lot of humans, we have a lot of clerics. We're going to be able to scry a lot with this. The next one I'd add are Thriving Grove and Thriving Heath. They both come in tapped, but they're able to choose a color other than white or other than green, depending on those. And then you can tap them for green, white, or white, green, depending on whichever one is which. Of course, Command Tower is a staple that would just have to be added. Last one to be added would be Temple Garden. This is a shock land. It comes in, if you want it to come in untapped, you pay 2 life. If you don't, it comes in tapped. Now the next lands I'd add in are search lands. The first one I'd add is Windswept Heath. You tap, pay 1 life, sacrifice Windswept Heath, search your library for a forest or plains card, then put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Next one to add would be Fabled Passage. Tap, sacrifice Fabled Passage, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. Then if you control 4 or more lands, untap that land. Of course, we'd add Evolving Wilds, sacrifice it, get a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. Terramorphic Expanse, do the same thing. And then Krosan Verge. It comes in tapped. You can tap it and add a colorless, or you can pay 2, sacrifice it, and search your library for a forest card and a plains card. Put them on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So I like adding a lot of these tap sacrifice lands for a multitude of reasons. You can fix your mana base, but these usually come in handy for me. Even in the late game, a lot of people in my playgroup have liked to play decks where they need to know the card that is on top or on bottom of your library and make you mill your entire library till you get that card or exile it, what have you. These help me by tapping, sacrificing, and then being able to shuffle my deck to make it sure that they don't know what's in my deck. On top of that, I would also add Myriad Landscape. It can kind of ramp you a little bit. It enters the battlefield tapped. Tap it, add colorless, or you can pay 2, search your library for 2 basic land cards that share a land type. So a little bit of ramp, but also giving you that kind of same ability. Now the next 3 I add, depending on who you talk to, technically aren't land. But I'd be adding Tangled Florahedron, Fastwood Fortification, and Bala Ged Recovery. Tangled Florahedron is technically a creature you tap to add green, but on the back, it's a land. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can tap it to add green, but it gives you a little bit of leeway about how you want to cast the spell. And the same thing with Fastwood Fortification. It's an instant, you can put a 1/1 counter on target creature, or Bala Ged Recovery, it lets you return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So, technically who you talk to might be a land, might not be. On the front part, not technically a land, but I always count it in my land slot anyway. So the next 3 I'd add are Castle Garenbrig, Bretagard Stronghold, and Mistveil Plains. Castle Garenbrig says that it enters the battlefield tapped unless I control a forest. I can tap to add green, or I can pay 4, tap it, and I can add 6 green to my mana pool. Spend mana only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures, which is usually something I'm going to do with the mana. Bretagard Stronghold says that it enters the battlefield tapped, and I can tap it to add green. Pay green and 2 white, tap it, sacrifice it, and I can put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 creatures I control. They gain vigilance and lifelink until the end of turn. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So, a good way to kind of close out a game, potentially, would be with Walking Ballista and this card. Mistveil Plains. It's technically a plains. You can tap it to add white, but it enters the battlefield tapped. You can pay white, tap it, and put target card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. You can only activate this ability only if you control 2 or more white permanents. So technically, our 1/1 green and white human soldiers are white permanents, so you'd be able to activate Mistveil Plain and get something out of your graveyard if you need it, back into your library. Alright, so the last 3 non-basic lands I would add would be Karn's Bastion, Llanowar Reborn, and Oran Reef the Vastwood. Karn's Bastion says that you can tap, add colorless, pay for, tap it, proliferate. Proliferate, you'd be able to choose any number of permanents and give them another counter of the type that they already have. Llanowar Reborn says that it enters the battlefield tapped, but add green to your mana pool. Craft 1 says this land enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter on it. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may move a 1/1 counter from this land onto it. Oran Reef the Vastwood says that it enters the battlefield tapped. Tap it to add green to your mana pool, or you can tap it and put a 1/1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. If we're bringing in a bunch of creatures, you best believe that you want to have this out. Lastly, you of course want to have some basic lands. I have 5 plains and 7 forests. That's just what I have. That's what I think that this deck needs. I've playtested it a little bit, and that's what it seems that I need. So those are the lands. So yeah, that's basically the deck. Torens Fist of the Angels, just with money poured into it. This deck has a lot of salt in it. It's got a lot of powerful cards and a lot of power behind it. So I'd probably give this deck a 9. Of course, that's subjective, and who knows what people might say about the lands that I have. I do have a lot of lands that say come in tapped, and that might slow things down a little bit, but I really don't think so. I've playtested this out, and I like the ramp that it has, I like the push, and I like the draw that it has. So, in the comment section, tell me what you think. Oh, and don't forget, I'm giving away a pack of Double Feature. Just like and subscribe, that's all you have to do. As soon as I hit 10 subscribers, I'll be giving this away. So, looking forward to you guys coming back, and I'll see you next time.